Good morning, welcome to the Edinburgh Television Festival Question Time, the session which focuses as much on the audience as on the panel. First though, let me introduce our panel this morning. From the left, Damien Collins, MP and Chair Culture, Media and Sport Committee. He's been the chair of this committee since October 2016. His role as committee chairman has included leading inquiries into, amongst other things, fake news and the impact of Brexit on the creative industries, including whether the UK will continue to be able to attract and retain creative talent from across the world. In the run-up to this year's general election, Damien called for Google and Facebook to do more to tackle fake news and condemned the banning of CNN and the BBC from the White House press conferences. Next, Jayne Managing Director of Sky Vision. Jayne has been Managing Director of Sky Vision, Sky's production arm, for some years now. She oversees the company's investments in 8 UK and US production businesses and a distribution arm that represents both Sky original productions and significant third-party catalogue. Fiona Campbell, on my left, is Director of Digital at the BBC. Her teams work across the BBC website, APP and social media platforms. And the BBC has invested significantly in mobile news, launching a vertical video product called Videos of the Day in the News app, as well as Reality Check. Her particular focus has been on audiences among the under-25s, women and the less well-off groups who are underrepresented in BBC core news audience. She is also a champion for women right across the BBC. Next, Kevin Bathurst, who is Group Director of Ofcom. He has been Group Director of Content Media Policy Ofcom since October 2016. He oversees Ofcom's broadcast regulation and policy. He's a member of Ofcom's Executive Board and Ofcom's Content Board. He's also a very seasoned and long-standing producer, so knows it from the other side too. And last but not least, Kelly Webb-Lamb, Deputy Director of Programmes and Head of Popular Factual at Channel 4. She oversees factual entertainment, features and daytime commissioning teams, as well as creative diversity team and the nations and regions team. She's responsible for leading Channel 4's on-screen diversity and inclusion strategy, and I'll just let you into a very big secret. Kelly actually runs Channel 4. that is the truth of the matter. Let's take our very first question, and that comes from Melissa Bishop, a returning AP in Factual. Melissa.
Hi. It was reported in broadcast this week that the number of TV directors, female directors, has actually fallen in the past year. Considering Michaela Cole's call to arms that we get our house in order, do the panel have any suggestions on how to address this?
Kevin.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, one of the things that Ofcom's been doing a lot of work on and looking at very publicly is diversity on and off screen, and that's diversity in the widest sense, and obviously that includes the makeup of the workforces at the broadcasters. As you know, one of the key tools we think is transparency, which is the broadcasters need to come out and say who they are putting on screen or on air, and also who they're using behind the scenes. And we've done a lot of work. We published last year our first TV diversity report. Just published our first radio report, and the next TV diversity report's coming out in the next few weeks. And I do think transparency combined with pressure, from whichever source. But I also think in the long run, the argument is there, I'm sure all the broadcasters will say this, that broadcasters, the UK broadcasters, know that in order to properly connect with their audiences, their own survival strategy has to be actually a diversity on screen and off screen, a proper diversity.
But how do you actually enforce that? Are you talking about quotas? How do you get to that transparency?
Yeah, well, we have the powers on transparency to find out from broadcasters, and we do a lot of research as well about, the workforce diversity, but also their on-screen diversity. We don't have powers, rightly, to tell broadcasters how to run their own workforces, but I do think shining a light on it is probably the best we can do, and then it's kind of over to the broadcasters and they need to make their own decisions.
Yeah, if I can just speak about that. The BBC in the past 3 years under our previous Director of News had a particular focus on women in the workplace, and we had a women's leadership scheme, and all that kind of leadership from the top means that it empowers women at all levels to come forward and say, listen, I want to do this, but I can't do this because of my need to care for people at home, my need to work part-time, whatever their requirements might be. And for example, you know, obviously I work inside BBC News, but we have now Claire Marshall, who's an environment specialist who makes some of our most successful digital content in the field of the environment, who basically, she said, I need to work part-time. I don't work in London. I can't just sit at desks in London. And we just said, right, do you know what? Fine. You work part-time, you work in your house, you come to London when you need to come to London, and you deliver the content whenever it's needed. Now, so that happens, but what I do have to say is we have to keep focusing on this issue, and it has to be continually brought to the attention of the leadership, because unless the leadership sets the tone and says we expect this to be delivered, people further down the chain don't see it as a priority to make it happen.
And Kelly, on the question of class, I mean, too posh to produce, I mean, Channel 4 didn't come out well on that. And the whole idea is that, and coming back to what Michaela was saying, you know, she's a misfit. There's lots of misfits. Yeah. And we need, in a sense, more misfits to be part of the general conversation.
I think that's right. And I think it's really important that as an industry, we actually look at the sort of texture of what Michaela spoke about. And for me, there are a number of things, of which definitely women is one. But I think the misfits thing is so crucial that we properly kind of address that, and we don't actually think about some of the headlines that she spoke about, and we think about what was beneath those, because Michaela, I think it's probably everybody will agree, is an extraordinary human being. That speech was beautifully written, it performed to perfection. She's a very unusual person, and the truth is that if you come from a background like Michaela, you have to be an extraordinary person to get success in our industry, and yet we have an industry full of, frankly, mediocre, posh white people who get success.
Any names come to mind?
And I think, you know, that we actually have to understand that if we want to be properly creative as an industry, we have to make room for different perspectives, and people, there's no, that you can't. Charlotte talked in the leaders debate about how even assistant commissioners are hired for their opinions on what makes good telly, for their instincts, for their, you know, for their taste. And if everybody comes from the same place, how are we ever going to be properly creatively successful? And I think that misfit thing is really important. And I would say, I'll tell you a little story about when I first arrived at Channel 4, my first creative breakfast with the heads of department, which is a intimidating environment full of really clever people who do, as is sort of, you know, apocryphally
clever posh people
talk about, you know, it's a fantastically brilliant privilege to spend an hour and a half talking genuinely about creative things, and that's what happens there. For my first one, I thought, I'm not going to be intimidated, I'm going to work really hard and I'm going to prep, and I'm going to make sure that I speak in my first creative breakfast. It's like and I did, and when I came out, one of the other people who was there, who's not the channel anymore, turned to me and said, you did really well, you fitted in straight away. And it's that fitted in thing.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I am white and I've got a degree in philosophy, and, you know, and if I, just because I went to bog standard comprehensive and didn't get into Oxford, if I feel that I need to work hard to fit in, what does that mean for everybody else? And I think it's really important that we properly deal with the misfits point.
But that what Michaela was saying and what she was saying was that even the questions of, you know, what makes you who you are? Because people talk about the plays they see, the television they watch, the clothes they wear. All these things are different reference points to the majority of people in broadcasting. Jayne.
Anne Mentzer, our head of drama, is fantastically articulate on this subject, and she makes it a point to speak to writers that are misfits. And she's very, very conscious of what they watch. Often as a commissioning editor, you'll speak to a new writer and say, what do you watch? But even what people watch is informed by their social class. And so she's very mindful of ensuring that she she casts her net very wide and invites in those different voices and doesn't judge people on how they're dressed and what they watch. A writer who comes in who's a great fan of Coronation Street should be welcomed into Sky. That's great populist drama. And so Anne's a kind of fantastic role model in that regard. I think generally at Sky it's a mixture of carrot and stick. We have imposed healthy quotas on ourselves. The content corporate group, commercial and ops, were found to be insufficient in, particularly in BAM diversity recently. So we've adopted a quota to have 15% by 2020 and 25% elsewhere.
Do you think the other broadcasters should have quotas as well on that?
I think quotas are important because I think you need that initial push. On gender, gender pay gap was 11.5%, lower than the average, the national average, but still not good enough. Our target is to have 50% of women in senior roles by 2020. Gender balance on shortlists.
My wife, actually.
Diversity balance on shortlists. But more than that, I think more importantly at Sky, what we have is a bunch of mentoring and sponsorship and network programmes, because we need to change the culture from the bottom as well. Social mobility is a harder thing to encapsulate because it's more nebulous. But Fraser Nelson wrote this morning in The Guardian about a programme they have at The Spectator, which I thought was really interesting. He brings on 2 interns a year, and they're not through CVs. So the applicants have to take part in, they have to apply. It's all about aptitude. They have to write blogs, there's a test. The selection panel don't know who these people are. They only see their aptitude and their work. And then the 2 people were selected. They turned up and it was delightful. One was a teenager with 3 E's at A-level, and the other was a former university don who was over 35, and she wanted to retrain as a journalist. Now, that would not have been possible through a CV-based selection process. So I think it is about imposing quotas. It's also about changing culture through these networks, these mentoring groups, but also we need to be imaginative, and I think that programme at Spectator is really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm going to come on to talk about Out of London much later, but it just strikes me that, you know, you need to be out in communities, you know, you need to be out, you know, you want to have sort of a Sky office in the middle of Tower Hamlets to say, look, you know, we're here, you know, we're for you, we're for everybody. Quotas, Damien?
I prefer transparency. I think sort of laying it out there, naming and shaming companies, organisations, broadcasters that do badly, I think is a more effective remedy. But it's about leadership for the whole industry. I mean, I think it's interesting that Michaela's been a brilliant McTaggart. It's only the 5th time in 42 years that a woman has delivered the McTaggart. You know, I think the Murdoch family have delivered 3. You know, so you know, admittedly Elizabeth Murdoch's got a foot in both camps there. You know, but you know, but if you go back to Elizabeth, I mean, you know, Elizabeth's 2012, the last person. Before that, you have to go back to Janet Street Porter in 1995. I mean, and that is. I think these things do matter. Actually, it's the profile, the status that women of different experiences are recorded within the industry at the highest levels.
I think that's also what you were saying, Jayne, about this idea about what Fraser does, and he does it at The Spectator. I know that there is this internalised bias, isn't there? There is an internalised bias. I mean,
there is an internalised bias, and I think that we, you know, at Channel 4 we did our own research into social mobility, and then Sam Friedman from the LSE who did that, he then looked at the indie community. And look, hands up, it's not a good picture. And I think there's lots of things going on at the channel that we're doing. There's lots of funding of people to relocate for traineeships and apprenticeships. We offer paid work placements in the regions as well as in London. We do a lot of outreach to places that aren't where people from telly are, you know, stereotypically from. But it's deeper than that, and there's so much more work to do. And actually, to be honest, I think it's one of the reasons why our move to the nations and regions is really important, because actually being able to move to London, you know, some of those statistics...
Finally, you know, Channel 4, I mean, not you, I mean, it was kicking and streaming.
But it's such an, you know, it's such an important thing. And I think some of the, in the Too Posh to Produce session, there was some really interesting statistics that stood out for me. One which was that people in telly, I think it's something like 73% of people in telly go out in the week at least once, compared with 17% of everyone else. And 49% of people in telly take at least 3 holidays a year, compared with 17% of everyone else. And actually, a lot of that's about London. Yeah. And so if you live in London and you're in telly, the idea that you really know what life is like, creative decision makers need to really know what life is like for the people that we're making content for. And so it's so important, I think, for...
But the language even of that, I mean, you're talking about that. You hear producers, you hear commissioners all the time talking about going up there for a couple of days or going out there as if it's some kind of godforsaken place where the wildlings live. let's get the audience into this, please. Let's talk about Michaela for a minute. Questions from the audience, please. Yes, hand up there and hand up at the back. Can I take you first? And we've got 3 mics. Who's going to be next? Yes, right in the middle there. OK, let's take this now. Yeah.
Hello, I've got 2 questions, but I know that that's probably a bit greedy, so I will think of the right one. But regarding Michaela, I've come to Edinburgh a few years now. It was great to see Michaela as a person of colour give her speech. I don't think, and I might be wrong, I've seen a lot of sessions. I don't think I've seen anybody else from an ethnic background be given a microphone or be on stage across all the sessions I've seen, apart from the Netflix session. So is she going to be a misfit for good, and she's obviously very young as well, and she's a Londoner, so it's just a problem, and are people like me from a person of colour background just not really going to ever get on a stage to have these sort of conversations? Very good point. Jayne, I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, nobody on stage apart from Michaela was a person of colour at the television festival.
That's not true.
It's not true?
It's not true.
Sorry, it's not true. You just can't have been in the right sessions. But I absolutely take your point that there are not enough people of colour. But I mean, I'm afraid I have to be absolutely accurate about that. Apparently, that's not true. But very good point about there should be more people. Should we just pick up on that? In terms of the people that are actually the people that are addressing the television festival, have we got to be a lot better at that as well?
Well, do you know, it always strikes me when I come here, you know, you look at the people here and there is a problem still at senior levels, you know, diversity on the stage and in the audiences here is still representative of a problem in the industry, I think, at senior levels, and you know, it does take time there, to be fair, to address that.
A question there. Can we get the lights up a bit more so I can see, please? And a question up there, and you've got a mic in the middle. Take your question first.
It started already. It sort of misfits has turned into a nice little pop word that people can throw out and dismiss. So I'd like to know what the panel suggests the industry do about avoiding that, and what sort of definition of misfit we are talking about, because Michaela's conversation was, and it's already driven into a particular kind of person, a particular kind of misfit, which is already a token. Is already a tokenistic token within 3 days. So how can we avoid that really? Seriously,
it's this sense of other. You know that using other. That word. It's this sense of other and distance, which is not. I feel uncomfortable with, frankly. You know, from my experience, I just going to keep coming back to this, and it's good that Damien referred to it as well. You know, it is all about leadership, because if the leadership sends the right tones from the very top, that the priority is we want people from all kinds of experiences, all kinds of geographic places in our staff with those stories, and I expect to see that, and I expect to see that on a real basis, then that kicks enough ass to make it happen. You know, I can sit here and I can say to you, oh, we have our assistant commissioners scheme, we have our digital apprentices scheme, that brings people from around the UK. I can say all those things to you, but I myself, you know, as everybody here will spend a lot of time mentoring people at all levels and trying to push, basically push and hustle to make things happen and make connections. And really I've come to the conclusion that unless that's what's needed, but at the top I can't hustle through, or people can't hustle through completely to the point of success unless the people at the top are saying, yes, that is going to happen, and hence the need for transparency so that we keep getting the feet to the fire is absolutely key. But I really reject that notion of other.
I think that leadership is absolutely essential, and that's how this is going to really change. But I was actually shocked, if I'm honest, by how little people seem to talk about it, rather than that it had become a new... I felt like the conversation sort of stopped. And I think that the fitting in telly is such a, you know, nebulous, difficult thing to really get a handle on what it means. But that's what she was talking about. And I think we need to keep the conversation going and make sure that we do. What does it mean? What does it mean for different people? The quote that she made about there are as many perspectives as there are people, I know it wasn't hers, she quoted someone, I can't remember who it was, but that's absolutely right. And we need to find a way, it has to be through leadership, to allow spaces for people not only to come into the industry, but then for us to look after them once they get here. And that's also what she was talking about, right? She was talking about the fact that she wasn't looked after in a way that she was comfortable with. And we need to make sure that we do that too. It's a really complex question, but it has to come from the top.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to you because I know you want back in, but Damien and Jayne want in.
Yeah, just on the leadership point, and from a sort of a different sector. I had a meeting with the director of the Science Museum, and he was talking about the exhibition they've had on India. And they survey people that go, and not surprisingly, the number of people from Indian ethnic extraction who visited the exhibition is much, much higher than it is on average for people who visit the museum as a whole. And earlier in this year, I visited the African American History Museum in Washington, which is, I think, probably the best museum I think I've ever been to. One thing you really notice there compared to the rest of the Smithsonian, there are lots of African Americans who go. And I think those two examples for me showed you, if you actually do something overt to say this is for you, people come. And maybe people that didn't normally come because they can see that there's something on offer for them. And I think that that's the direction leadership has to go to show that these doors are open.
Jayne.
Leadership, yes, but I think we have to be mindful not to be too dour about this. It shouldn't be like eating cardboard. It should be joyful. And I think we need to pay account to this on screen and off screen. Sky One recently launched a drama called Bulletproof, written by, created and performed by two black guys. It was a buddy cop series, and it was brilliant, and it was commercial. And we need to do a bit more of that. We need to kind of get ourselves out of this dour debate and actually embrace this as a good thing, as a joyful thing. On the misfit question, I think it's a great, I loved her definition because it's a self-selecting definition. You don't know if I'm a misfit by the way I look and sound, but I might be. And that phrase allows me to be a misfit, so I support her in that.
Right, there's a number, I want to come back to you, and who else has got the mics? There's two, I'm going to take two comments before we move on, but I want to come back to you for your response.
I guess ultimately the question isn't, we talk about letting people in, the language is still there. We're letting people in, we're going to the regions, we're bringing people in who don't normally. Why don't you just move out the way? I mean, I think that's, but do you know what I mean? There's a sort of, there's an old adage in business when you do business modelling with people, which is that sort of, if you release do 25% less of your job than you do, give that space to someone else and see what happens.
Thank you very much.
That's
2
the sort of thing
points.
that needs to happen.
2 points to finish off. The gentleman in the middle there.
It's 18 years since the first BBC Diversity Action Plan. We've had 18 years of leadership. BBC Studios, BAME employment, is increasing at 0.1% a year. At that rate, it's going to take more than 40 years to achieve 14%, which is what the population is. This leadership isn't working. What actions should the BBC be taking? What action should Ofcom take to actually drive change? Because leadership ain't hacking it.
Thank you. We're going to put that to the panel in a second, but second question or point up there. Yep, fire away.
Michaela Cole touched on this idea of feeling like the TV industry broadcasting is box ticking, and you mentioned about quotas being very important. Why should it take quotas in order for you to ensure that you increase the amount of misfits within the industry? I, as a young black woman wanting to come into the industry, have this dilemma of feeling like, am I wanted, or is this just am I just another box for you to tick? So how are you going to assure me that I am wanted within the industry and not just a need?
Right, I'm going to put that just both to Kevin and to Damien, and then we'll move on. Damien.
I think wanted is exactly the right word, because what would be the point of bringing people in from diverse communities if when they got into the industry we just expect them to behave like all the white people? The fact that you want people who have got different experiences, different points of view, different creative ideas that are bringing something new and fresh, and that actually there's a big section of the population that aren't represented in our creative industries, which means the creativity and ideas that they hold are not represented in the work either. And that's why it's not a question of saying if we fulfil the quotas that will be a good thing in and of itself. It's saying there's something missing. It can be visualized because we can identify the ethnicity of people and saying people of this color or this race are missing, but their ideas are missing too. And that's why you're quite right. It's about being wanted, not just about being there.
Being wanted, and secondly, on the point there that BBC Studios is woeful.
Yeah, well, I mean, Simon and I have had a lot of dialogue about this. I must say, I worked in the industry for a very long time, for over 20 years, and I'm in a different role. And I do think there's been a sea change in the last 2 or 3 years amongst leadership, actually, in terms of actually driving this and doing it properly and making real efforts to change the approach and change what is on screen and what is off screen. And all I can say from Ofcom's point of view is, will keep the pressure up. We will keep putting out the information so people can see if there is change or not, or if there isn't change. And part of the important part, as the way the industry is changing, by the way, is Deborah's work with the Diversity Network, with Project Diamond, which is about what the independents are doing as well, because the independents are an increasingly important and vibrant part of the industry, and frankly, that is increasingly where people are working on the production side. So to have the proper, transparent information about what is happening in the independents is also equally important as in the broadcasters, in my view.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to take a question from David Strachan. Your question, please.
What are the panel's reactions to Jeremy Corbyn's proposals yesterday?
Damien.
Well, it's quite
Are you right behind Jeremy Corbyn is what I'm asking you?
Only so I can keep my eye on him. But I think, well, there are a number of things he set out. Firstly, I'm slightly concerned about this idea of, journalists and others having to label their class when they work in the industry. Now, we've been talking a lot about doing more. The industry needs to do more to attract more people to work in it, and that's about class as well as ethnicity. But the idea of applying labels in this overt way to people, and actually when you try and do that, you find that most people's background is actually quite complex. So a person might have gone to Oxford, but might also be the first person in their family to go to university. So maybe Jeremy would set up a kind of ranking committee to create a score for people, and then that could be.
And I wonder how he'd score himself.
Exactly. I mean, he might find he and quite a number of his parliamentary colleagues are somewhat higher on that ranking list than they might want to let on. I think the idea of the kind of creating a digital British Leyland is also, a bizarre one as well. I think actually the creative and tech sector is being led by the people within it. I don't think creating a nationalised industry that sits alongside it would necessarily be helpful. But
he is right about, needing to somehow ingrain social mobility. He is right about that.
Oh, yeah, he is, absolutely. But I think that should be done looking at the industry as a whole, looking at companies as a whole, using anonymised data to look at their performance. I think the idea of almost putting a label on someone saying, well, I'm going to question what you're saying about me or the reports you're writing because you're only doing that because of your class. I think that's a kind of a political badge that's being thrown in there, and I think that shouldn't have any kind of place in the media or in the media plays such an important part in our democracy as well. I think it challenges that too. On the tech companies, the one area of where I do have some agreement with him is the idea of a levy on the tech companies. I don't agree.
Talk about tech.
I don't agree with that should just go to the BBC. But my idea was that, and the Select Committee's idea was that a levy on the tech companies should help fund a big investment in media literacy education in schools and colleges, which I think is increasingly important to keep people safe online and help tackle some of the underlying issues around fake news. Just finally, the idea of introducing industrial democracy to the BBC is I'm not sure would be helpful. You would create by electing, if licence fee payers started electing members of the BBC board, that would be the biggest personal mandate in British politics, one of the biggest in Europe. That would insert politics in a massive way into the running of the BBC, and I think that would be very damaging too.
Fiona, a British digital corporation.
Well, it's good that we're having this debate. Like, just to come back quickly on the social mobility and representation point, I think years ago, I don't think this conversation would be quite as front of mind as it is today. That is only a good thing. We can all have to admit that we have to do more. I agree. The BBC has been doing a lot. Kamal Ahmed is joining the News Appointments Board. There has been a diversity project that is committed to leadership roles from black and minority ethnic individuals going forward for 2020. So I have to reject this. A lot is going on. I spend my day in conversations and trying to meet those points. So putting that aside,
you're the director of digital. What do you think about BBC Digital Corporation?
think, the fact is we are, reinventing the BBC for a new generation. The British, all British tech and content suppliers are facing the challenge of the younger audiences declining. We all are, we've been reinventing the iPlayer, developing it further. This autumn there are further online content developments that the BBC will be discussing.
So we don't need what Jeremy's
I just think it's too, I think that we have to absolutely work together to meet these challenges because, all working separately is, and I know that Project Kangaroo is a thing of the past, but that working together is going to be under further discussion as we go forward. And I think that is where the conversations need to be across the industry.
Another point to you, Kelly, on what Jeremy Corbyn was saying. Should commissioning editors elect the controller? That's what he's suggesting.
That's a very interesting question. I think, if we're honest about it, that's not the way to go, is it? We need people to be appointed on merit because they're the right people for the job. I do think that, for us, the social mobility question, we're already doing that. We are monitoring our staff. We will continue to monitor our staff. We know we're not labelling individuals, but we are monitoring our staff. I think if we're going to do that as an industry, we need a standard that we all agree is the way of measuring this, because that, exactly as Damien says, that's really complicated. People's backgrounds are complex. But we are.
And you're saying it could lead to exclusion of the wrong people because, as you were saying, you could have someone that goes to Oxford by their own merit, but they have never had anyone at university or even finishing secondary education. Kevin, where's Ofcom stand on all this? The other thing he was saying, of course, that the newspapers are, are owned by a few unaccountable billionaires. He was sort of suggesting, he was almost taking a Trump line about fake news as well, wasn't he, in certain papers?
Well, I have to say, there are a couple of things that I think, he picked up issues which are important. I think, I'm not sure the solution is there, but the proper long-term funding of the BBC, taking that out of the political cycle, frankly, I've always thought would be a good thing, and that is best practice when you look around public service broadcasters elsewhere. To find a way of doing that. To pick up on Damien's point, I think potentially some of the digital tech companies, they're making massive profits. There are areas like media literacy or indeed funding of journalism overall, which there could be ways of thinking about that. I'm not sure, again, his solution's the right one. The one thing to pick up on your point about Trump, Ofcom has responsibilities for impartiality and accuracy, due impartiality and due accuracy in broadcasting. We also have a responsibility for overall plurality of journalism in the UK. And, and as a former journalist and as a current regulator, I'm immediately allergic to anything that impinges or potentially impinges on the plurality of views in the press or the impartiality or accuracy of the BBC and other broadcasters. So I would have concerns in how some of those would be carried out if they would impinge on those things.
Unaccountable billionaires owning things, Jayne, anything sort of spring to mind?
I was thinking of. Well, he gave us food for thought, but I felt his solutions were more of an amuse-bouche than a hearty main course, really. Fine, hold billionaires, tech billionaires to be accountable, but I'd also like to ensure that freedom of press holds politicians to greater accountability too. So once again, a good suggestion, forced into, for his own self-interest in terms of his illustrations. The tax and levy issue is interesting. It's not new. Labour suggested it in 2009 for broadband and withdrew that on the basis that the cost would probably be passed on to the consumer. I think we do need better regulatory oversight of online platforms. We do need an accountable framework, more transparency. The tax issue is interesting. But I urge Jeremy to understand the difference between an ISP and a social media platform. ISPs already pay a lot of tax. They also provide connectivity throughout the country. Sky paid 142 million in corporations tax this year. So I think he just needs to do a bit more homework, really.
On Corbyn's contribution yesterday, any questions on that? Yes. Questioner here, thank you first. Someone over here as well. I saw a hand go up. Take your question first.
Thank you. David Henry, SBC. I actually think we do already have a digital British Leyland. It's called the BBC. And my concern is, while I totally agree with Ofcom's stance that it has a duty for media polarity, you've just granted a licence to the BBC to launch another television channel in Scotland. That is not increasing polarity in the marketplace.
Kevin.
Yeah, well, we did a careful look at. I mean, we always weigh up with the BBC with new services. What is the market impact versus what is the public interest of that service? And then we made it clear that, on balance, we felt there is a public interest in providing a new dedicated service to Scottish audiences in the way the BBC describes. You know, they are providing some unique content. They're saying they can provide some unique content on that channel, and we will keep an eye on it. We did have concerns which we expressed about the potential impact on media plurality and so on up here in Scotland. We asked a lot of extra questions to the BBC to try and bottom that out.
And you bottomed it out sufficiently?
Oh, I thought we did, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, there was this figure of 80 journalists. When we dug into it, it's not 80 journalists at all, actually. It's 80 people working in news. They may describe it within the BBC as journalists. Many of them are production people. So, you know, we did get into the detail of what are those people doing to see what the impact might be.
Right, let's take another question, and that is from Chris Curtis, the editor of Broadcast. Your question, please.
Thank you. Are the FANG giants an important source of additional funding for the British TV industry, or could they scoop up the best talent and the best ideas and leave the traditional broadcasters competing for second place?
Thank you very much. Jayne Miller-Chip. This week you were very critical of the FANGs, or quite critical.
Well, yes. Slight hyperbole in the headline. When I slammed the FANGs, what I actually said, they're making it quite tricky.
Fake news! Fake news!
Our view at Sky is that the FANGs offer, they're an addition to the media landscape. I think from a programme funding point of view, the story gets more complex. I said this week that I felt that the deals offered by the global SVODs can be difficult because they can restrict your ability to make further onward sales, secondary market. They need, if they're taking global rights, they need to pay enough to pay out those secondary windows unless they give you that second window in a meaningful fashion, in a usable fashion. So I think it's we're working on it. I think sometimes a global SVOD deal can be the best deal you get. We recently sold a comedy drama to Netflix in the knowledge that we wouldn't be able to secure the same kind of revenue and worldwide viewership by selling that show country by country. So it can work. The deals on offer, that, you know, Netflix particularly is difficult to negotiate with. In fact, they don't negotiate. You kind of get what you're given. From a producer point of view, it's a new buyer in the marketplace, and that can be good. But I would urge everybody to look at the small print, because what are you signing away? You could be signing away your rights in perpetuity, and are you giving yourself the ability for further onward sales to secondary windows? So, I mean, look at the small print, really.
Kelly, is it a threat to Channel 4?
I mean, I look at this from a creative perspective as a commissioner, and I think what is absolutely clear without doubt is that the landscape is changing, and it's changing rapidly. And what goes along with that is that all the kind of old rules about how things work are being kind of thrown up in the air, and we don't really know how things work. And we're watching that change week by week. And for me, I think we have to attack that creatively in a positive way. We have to say, OK, here's an opportunity then for us to try loads of different things. We don't know anymore whether, you know, a particular type of show at 9 o'clock is going to cut through. So we need to try some different things. I think we've got a massive advantage in being able to do things live. We need to really, you know, properly exploit that and think about other ways of working with live. I think we need to think about other ways of scheduling things. For us, it's about approaching it positively.
Does live matter if you're under 30? Because you just find things where you don't actually.
Well, it does, because it does, because I think one of the things that is, I mean, look at Love Island. I know it's not live, but it is 24-hour turnaround. And, you know, Bake Off's back next week. that will also be event TV. The football, it mattered. The royal wedding, it does matter. And there are those shared occasions. And I think the impetus is on us to find new ways to get to them. How do we bring factual into that space? What do we creatively do to face this? And to me that feels exciting, because when the rules are broken, that's when fresh ideas come. So I think from a commissioning perspective, I'm up for it.
Yeah, it was interesting because also in the McTaggart, Michaela didn't say who it was, but she'd been offered $1 million for something. And she was savvy enough to know, I'm going to reject that because actually it will restrict what I can do with it. My rights will be given away. So, you know,
and the other thing is about British content, and I think that, you know, as public service broadcasters, you know, what we have to do right now is we have to be distinctive, we have to be different, and we have to be British. And that's, you know, nurturing British talent is a really important thing that is, for us, is absolute top priority.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Tony Hall was saying. Tony Hall said BBC must fight US tech firms to protect British values. And also Patrick Holland said, the Indies risk selling the golden goose to the SVODs, because initially they want the money to set up, maybe take on more staff, do more development, but actually they're giving too much away.
Well, I would say, hands up, who was in the Netflix session yesterday? Fair sprinkling, and I find it was a chat, a fireside chat. But I thought there was some, you know, there were questions asked of them about how does your development funding work, how does your cash flow process work, how do you develop with you, how do you contact you to actually pitch an idea. And I was sitting there quite interested that this. It's
very secretive in a way, Netflix. It's very secretive, and of course they don't say their figures, they never say anything.
You compared that to the leaders' debate, where rightly so all the broadcasters were being taken apart as to how quickly you can get a meeting and how quickly you can get something green-lit. So I think, you know, I would agree with Kelly, it's great, it shakes up the landscape, it gives us all a kick in the ass, frankly, that we've all got to, you know, work more closely and more effectively with the whole sector, and it's good that more money is coming into the sector. However, the reality is, the main players in the market are the people who have got to make the regional and the national basis work, are the people who, when we know there's a great series producer in Leeds who needs more work, we're the people who are going to make the calls to get those people to work.
And one thing
that's not necessarily in Netflix's plan. Their plan is to serve the global audiences.
Yeah, but not even just the FANGs. What is it? The MAGA, the big tech, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon. I mean, they're hoovering up. Damien, I mean, do you not have worries about actually what that's going to leave producers with in this country in the end?
Yeah, I do. I have big worries about it. I think with the BBC in particular, I think when we get to the next BBC Charter, which is a few years away, the issue will then not be what it's been in the past, which is, does the BBC dominate the broadcasting landscape to the detriment of commercial competitors? Is the BBC too small to continue to do what it does, you know, across the range of different channels and formats that it provides? And
is the BBC too small?
Yeah, it's too small to do the sorts of things. Too small to do the sorts of things the BBC has done before. You know, and that because when Alex Mann was in front of the Select Committee recently, she agreed with us. There's a real danger that the days of British broadcasters commissioning and making big high-end TV drama could be a thing of the past. We could be priced out the market by the new competitors. I think the thing on selling is really important too. I think it would be a real danger for British television if we ended up being totally reliant on Netflix and Amazon to distribute and sell. I think the British broadcasters either working together, you know, probably best working together, I think need to kick on the sort of BritBox idea and have their own direct routes to sell programmes on demand and not just do it through
Excuse me, Kevin, what do you think of that idea?
Well, I think, you know, like our Chief Executive Sharon White said very clearly, she thinks that the UK broadcasters need to compete, to collaborate, to compete with these great, you know, new competition. The one thing I would say, I mean, it's interesting for us because when we're continuing taking judgments about new services, whether that's the BBC Scotland channel, whether it's changes to the iPlayer or whatever, and the BBC has to come to us, talk about these new services, and we're weighing up exactly what Damien just touched on, which is, you know, within the UK, the BBC is very dominant, and the impact it has on the other UK broadcasters can be very significant. We have to weigh that. However, on the other side, you have to weigh out the BBC is, at the same time, when it's developing iPlayer, they are now competing with Netflix and Amazon Prime and so on. So, you know, you're having to weigh up the global scene. And frankly, you know, like, we're going to see one of the biggest changes to UK broadcasting for years in the next few months when Sky is taken over, and whoever takes it over, you know, and that will be a significant change. And the you know, again, you know, what Disney or Comcast or whoever decide to do with what they buy here will have a significant change in the next few months.
But it's interesting because the FANGs are getting their FANGs in, and you have absolutely no locus there at all.
We have a little bit. I mean, interestingly, so for example, in the last few weeks, when it's meant to be quiet in August, Amazon were talking about their new tennis service because they bought rights to the ATP, and I think their initial view was that they probably didn't need a license for that. Our initial view was they did need a license for it, so they are now going to get a license for it. But these are the sort of areas now where the edges are.
And it's going to cost them a lot, that license, is it?
It was probably not going to cost them a lot, but they have certainly obligations that go with it. So, you know, as people like Amazon and so on move increasingly into these sort of areas, the other thing I would say is coming to the Edinburgh Festival, and I always think this is why it's a great reason to come, is, you know, you see every year, I mean, the Netflix session was great and they've got a few great new shows, but you go to every single controller session, whether it's Charlotte or whether it's the other controllers, and you see at the moment it is an absolute golden period where the UK broadcasters are producing fantastic content. And, you know, Netflix, frankly, are also producing different kind of fantastic content. My major concern is a lot of the UK broadcasters have become very dependent on co-production with companies like Netflix to produce some of the high-end drama and so on.
Yeah, because the BBC and do not have the money.
They don't, and I would seriously, you know, like I really would like to see in the next year or so, does that money from Netflix for co-productions and others, Amazon and so on, is that still in the marketplace? Because that could be a significant problem. If Netflix decide they're just going to go it themselves,
they already have. Don't worry about co-productions with Netflix and Amazon are mostly over. So it's been and gone. Co-production is alive and well. And the majority of high-end drama in this country is funded by the PSBs and Sky. Netflix is not commissioning more than any of the rest of us. And on the subject of sale, British shows are already sold throughout the world by BBC Worldwide, ITV Global, Sky Vision. So I think we're kind of running scared of something we shouldn't be here. I think there are bigger and more interesting questions around those businesses that aren't entirely entertainment businesses like Netflix, because in one way Netflix is more like the linear businesses than Amazon or Apple, which are either retail or hardware companies, and those businesses that can derive their revenues from something other than content are a little more challenging to us.
Just before we finish, looking forward to new boss?
I have a boss, thank you. His name's Gary Davey.
Let's take another question, and it comes from Charles Lauder, the CEO of the Indie Club. Your question, please.
Thank you. Looking at the Channel 4 move out of London with a specific focus on production and post-production ecology, what does the panel member, do the panel members consider 3 key measures of success, and how soon would they want to evaluate against those measures?
Thank you. Kelly, have you been on Rightmove yet? Just asking. Are you going?
I think that the move outside of London is something that we are actively. So there's lots of things going on. We've got to hit our 50% of originated content spend. We are also moving to 4 locations. Those things sound straightforward, but they're not straightforward at all. And we know that. We know, I've been talking to indies out of London about what the impact of this might be on them and how to do it successfully and properly. My feeling is that this is absolutely the right thing to be doing for all kinds of reasons. And we know that, and we've committed to it, and we're going to do it. The 50% of spend is massive, right? And it's really important. It's not going to be achieved easily. And there are lots of different things that we have to do in order to get to that. One of those things is about, speaking of your 3 things, one of those things is about working closely, investing more, putting more time and effort into our work with Indigenous nations and regions indies. We've already expanded Deborah Dunnett's team, and that's an absolute enormously important cornerstone of this. The second thing we have to do is talk to London indies, and we know this is difficult, about moving shows or them having offices in the nations and regions. It seems to me that long term, that's important to have this be a success in the long term, to genuinely grow an industry across the country rather than one that is primarily focused in London.
Carry on.
Can I just say, but we do know that in the short term, there are impacts of that on the Indigenous communities. And for me, a really important measure of success is that we properly address and mitigate against those short-term impacts. So we cannot have this be something that is anything but positive for the nations and regions.
Yeah, but let's talk about as you call it, the Indigenous indies. I mean, we don't want London indies to be the ones who just simply relocate for a big series and then delocate when the series is finished. I mean, it's about, as you said, and
that's exactly my point. That's exactly my point.
So important. I spoke with what Mark Downey said this morning as well about that, because you're talking not only about the indies, but about the whole structure of Channel 4. What he said, and he's the new CEO of IWC, we need to make sure there's empowered commissioners based outside London with serious amounts of money to spend, and not just another layer of commissioners. You want Indigenous commissioners commissioning with serious amounts of money. Will that happen?
Yes, that's exactly what's going to happen. And I think that's the thing to me. That
with sign-off as well, with sign-off.
Well, what does sign-off mean? Ian has sign-off, he's the channel controller. So yes, they will be actual, genuine, creative decision makers. And it feels to me that the two ways that this is going to be successful is one, through the spend, through the 50% spend, and the second is through having creative decision makers living and working outside of London, commissioning from people who live and work outside of London. Those two things have to happen, both of those things have to happen hand in hand. So absolutely, that's what's going to happen. That's the point of this, is yes, there will be creative decision makers outside of London.
And Damien, you'll be watching this closely.
Yeah, well, I was quite pleased because firstly, that the impasse was broken and a decision was made on Channel 4. When I spoke at the RTS conference in Cambridge, my solution to the problem is almost exactly the same as the one that's been adopted now, so I was quite pleased about that. For me, there are two clear things we should look to come out of it. Firstly, are programmes that wouldn't have been made as a consequence of this. And so is there a change in the creative output of Channel 4 because we've got different people in different places making different decisions? And the thing that I think is great about not just moving Channel 4 to one place, but having a series of different commissioning clusters is, can we see a broadcasting ecology develop around those clusters, where production companies that are working with Channel 4, production companies that Channel 4 invested and fund, develop clusters and centres of excellence around the locations where Channel 4 are as well. So we can actually see a physical establishment of a TV industry in a place where there may currently be little infrastructure.
And actually, that's why I think it's the right decision, important decision, that we're not moving a whole genre to one place, or a whole genre, because actually what that means is people then just from everywhere have to travel to that place. It doesn't help the situation that we're currently in. So to have clusters that will be cross-genre feels to me exactly the right thing to do for that reason. It means that a genuine industry, cross-genre industry, can develop.
And yet then it sort of shows up the BBC, doesn't it? Because you've got 99% of commissioning comes from London and is gifted out.
Well, I would disagree with that. I think, the Scottish production contribution to the BBC is big and has been significant. It can always be bigger.
But the commissioners...
The people, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean the Craig Hunter's here. There are individuals who are here. Joe's here for daytime. There are people who are here. However, in the terms of the three things and the future, I'm obviously from Northern Ireland and never managed to get a job in Northern Ireland, so I had to come over here. I would, of course, like to see more of the people who hold the budget sitting in other places. That's obviously, the way it's got to go. And with Channel 4 doing this, that'll help.
But there's no sign that BBC is actually going to do that. And just what you were talking about, the whole idea of having a different mindset, looking at the United Kingdom in a different way, you put some of your controllers out, you put people out to go to different pubs on a Friday night, to go to different theatres, to go to different football grounds. You just change that mindset, but you have to have the decision makers not in London.
Yes, you do have to have the decision makers, not in London. You know, the BBC Salford base is huge, and there's loads of, you know, the Children's Head is all up there. There's a lot of people who run big content there. Birmingham is big for us in the digital sphere, and as I say, you know, Belfast is big, has been, and is a big drama centre. But I'm not saying this is never good enough. It's never good enough. It's got to get better.
But if you look at the key decision makers in the BBC, you've got Charlotte, Cassian, Patrick. You've got everybody is in London.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, you know, for Ofcom, I mean, just to be clear, you know, we've used a lot of what tools we can to try and encourage production around the UK. So, in the BBC operating licence, we've put in requirements of the BBC to produce a certain number of amount of programming for national programming from outside London, and also a percentage of budgets as well, and that is helping to drive it. Our first our talk review of the BBC is about representation and portrayal of all the peoples of the UK, and that will be a wealth of information which says how well or otherwise the BBC is doing in that. So we're using all the tools we can. In terms of where the BBC locates people, that's not a question for Ofcom. I mean, the BBC's management of people is a question for the BBC.
Quick word from Jayne, and then out to the audience for a couple of questions.
Well, Sky as a whole is agnostic on the issue of Channel 4, but from Sky Vision's perspective, we have a big investment in nations and regions. We have investments in two nations and regions business, True North in Leeds and Avanti Media in Wales. So from that perspective, the nations and regions policy is really important to us. I'm all about Leeds and Cardiff for obvious reasons. But I think going back to the question, you know, what are the three measures? I think this is both a creative and industrial endeavour, and we need to look after both. And I think it is the broadcasters' responsibility to ensure we make this sustainable for nations and regions production companies, and that means ensuring that there's enough editors in town. You know, you put a long-running factual show in any city that doesn't already have a big media base, and it sucks up every editor for 50 miles around. So how are we going to cope with that? And that's a shared responsibility. I think ensuring proper growth of those nations and regions businesses, as well as the creative voice, which will be fresh and new. So it's not about lift and shift. So I think it's a shared responsibility to ensure that more than anything, this is a sustainable endeavour. And one point about London, sorry. As I oversee an international business, do not forget the importance of London on the international stage. We are the IP trading house of the world. So in our rush to regions and nations, we must also look after the business side of television, and London is very important to that.
I think that's David Strachan with the microphone.
I'm a bit worried about the suggestion that the solution is to push London companies to go out to the nations and regions. Of course, if they want to make that investment, that's fine. But looking at what happened with the BBC in 2007 when Mark Thompson announced 17% from the nations, a huge amount of box ticking went on. Our company, which had invested heavily in building relationships with commissioners, saw its network commissioning collapse at that time because the boxes were being ticked elsewhere. The companies that are here have the relationships with the universities, have developed the pipelines, know where to find the talent. If you plonk a branch office out here, it is not going to find it easy, and it's going to be quite destructive.
No plonking. Any more questions, any more points on this before we move on? Because we've got a fifth and final question. Okay, fifth and final question from Deborah, I think it is. Your question, please.
Hello. Who from the creative industry would you choose to couple up with if you were on Love Island?
I mean, let's be quite clear here. We're talking creatively couple up with. Let's just be quite clear. There's a very significant addition to that sentence. Jayne.
Oh, God. Who would I couple up with? I would couple up with the fabulously talented Issa Rae, the American writer, producer and actor. Why? Because she's a misfit, firstly. Secondly, because she's not of this house. Thirdly, because she's fabulously talented. And fourth reason, which connects back to Love Island, I have a massive girl crush on her.
Damien.
I think I would creatively couple up with Peter Morgan, because he makes... everything he writes is beautiful, and he makes politicians look like interesting three-dimensional characters. So.
Kelly. Definitely Ian Katz.
You're such a suck-up. Why?
Okay, I'm going to tell you the truth now. So the truth is, I would couple up with Saoirse Monica Jackson from Derry Girls, because I have got a total girl crush on her.
Tremendous talent.
Just so funny, so clever, so bright, massive talent, and actually, yeah, she's definitely my choice.
Kevin?
Well, I would have said this before this Edinburgh, and I'll definitely say it now, which is Joanna Lumley. Because, partly because she was great as Purdy when I was about 10, but also, you know, I just think she's incredible, really. She is turning out some fantastic programming, and, you know, you talk to people who work with her, and she's a complete delight to work with, even though she's fantastically famous and talented.
Fiona?
Because I'm very aspirational, Michelle Obama, mainly because I thought she did some great work with kids and health, and I just think it'll be really interesting to see what their content team is going to bring forth in terms of different voices, and also she's going to be able to get a meeting with anybody.
Please thank our panel, and thank you for joining us at Question Time. Thank you.